we get the chance to speak to the director of the brand new Apple TV Plus documentary, The Last of the Sea Women. Check out our conversation with Sue Kim. Let me tell you, I have been obsessed with this story since the pandemic because I read Lisa C's novel. And
Mm-hmm.
then I read The Mermaid of Jeju that came out a year later. And your film is, it takes me places. I didn't expect it to go to all of the places you took me to. So thank you very much for that. But I think the first question I have for you is you chose to tell the story using their voices and their voices alone, and you stayed out of the narrative. We don't hear you ask any questions. And could you talk to me about that decision when you went into making this?
Yeah, that's actually a filmmaking style that I adhere to. I'm purely observational. I don't ever insert myself into films. Not that I think that there's anything wrong with that. I think personal documentaries are some of my favorite forms of documentaries. I just That's kind of how I see the world, is sort of I'm an observer, I'm a watcher. And so I think it's just a natural inclination to make sure that my films feel that way as well. But I also really felt, especially with this film, especially because we're talking about a community of women that is on the verge of extinction and might not be here, in 10, 20 years. I really wanted to make this film a documentation of their story in their words while they were still here to tell their own story. So it was a very concerted effort to pull myself completely out of it and just let them run the narrative on their own story.
Can I say the first takeaway I had watching this, and I would love for you to chime in on this, but the first takeaway I had was these old women are so cool. Like that was the vibe I got just watching them interact with each other and
Mhm.
with everyone else outside, and even at that town hall.
Yeah.
They're just so cool. What was it like spending all of that time with them?
I mean, it was a dream, and that's literally exactly, I think, why I made this film. Is initially I first fell in love with them when I was a young girl. I saw them for the first time when I was 8 years old, and I didn't know anything about them. I was on a trip to Jeju with my parents, and we just happened upon a community of Haenyeo. And it was exactly that impression where they just were so cool. They were like all in their wetsuits. They were so loud and fun and like fighting with each other, but laughing too. And they just gave off this air of really bold, vibrant confidence. And as an 8-year-old girl, I had no idea what they did. I just remember thinking, that is some sort of secret underwater girl gang. And whatever they're into, I'm in. I want to be part of it. That's what I want to do. And so I stayed fascinated with them my whole life. And so for sure, when we finally were able to make this film, I wanted to portray them in that way that I remember first seeing them and how I still see them now, because that how you see them in the film is how they really are. They're like not afraid of anyone. Like yelling
Right.
at the Jeju environmental activists, that's 100% par for the course with them. They would yell at us half the time in a loving manner, but they're not afraid to mince words or tell you to like give them more space. They're just very bold and confident.
Truer words have never been spoken at any town hall when that lady stood up and just went, listen, one of you speaking Japanese, one of you speaking English. We don't know anything, and
We
you expect us to understand what's happening?
then if you expect us to skip work and then just join your cause, like you do your work for you, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It was so
I
great. But
know.
also, just speaking about this secret underwater cabal of sea women, the other thing that I found really fascinating was just the sheer physicality because when they're on
Mhm.
land, they're
Yeah.
slightly hunched over and they're
Yes.
walking slowly. And as soon as they hit the water, it's just majestic.
Yeah, that was a very purposeful sort of juxtaposition because that's what we saw. We saw, well, every once in a while, for instance, we had this 90-year-old Haenyeo character named Igumok in the film. It could outrun all of us. Like we were like huffing to keep up with her. She just would take off. Like I've never seen anyone in better physical condition than her. But for the most part, when we were with them on land, they felt like grandmas, they felt like elders. And then the minute they hit the water, it was a whole different story. So we definitely wanted to play with that juxtaposition to kind of show how physically agile and strong and their endurance level, hanging out in the ocean for 4 hours every day, how they could do that so easily. But then on land, you hear them huffing and puffing, walking up a hill. Like that really is the
Exactly.
sort of duality of their physical nature. I think it's because their bodies are so conditioned to working in the ocean that it's like a fish coming back to water. But, land, it's a different story.
When she's giving that tour, I was like, oh, I see what Sue's doing with the audio up with her huffing
Yes,
and puffing.
good catch. We did. We pulled it all the way up because we're like, she was having a hard time going up that hill, but we just saw her dive for like 5 hours that day. And we're like, what? Yeah.
Um, the story of Jungmin is really fascinating, also
Mhm.
because there is that parallel of, oh, look, the men were useless, so we had to do this. And then even with Jungmin, it's my husband lost his job and I
Mm,
had to
mhm,
respond in a certain way.
mhm,
And it feels like this mirror of history just repeating itself as to
mhm,
why these women end up being Haenyos. But I was going to ask you, in speaking to some of the younger women who have decided to do it, what
mhm.
did you gather was their motivations?
I mean, specifically with the two younger Henyos that were in our film, I loved talking to them about how they came to the Henyo culture. Because for me, when I started this film, one of the questions I had that I had no answer to was how do we preserve ancient traditions like the Henyo culture that are so beautiful and so rich with meaning, but might not be compatible with modern day times? Like, how do we reconcile preserving our culture and our ancient traditions, but living in modern day and embracing modernity? And I think the younger Haenyeo, the reason why they went to the Haenyeo culture was for very postmodern reasons. Like you said, Jungmin, she started looking into it because her husband had lost his job and she was wondering how she could help contribute to the family income. But she was specifically looking for an occupation that gave her a flexible work schedule as a
I loved
parent.
that as well. Yes.
I know. And it's like, and then same thing with Sohee. She worked for 8 years in a windowless cubicle and just like, I'm sure had digital fatigue and email exhaustion, all the modern day things. And she found her way to the Haenyeo culture as a relief and a step away from that like brutal office life. And those are very postmodern issues that all working women have. And they
But
found
also,
this
Sue, it's
ancient
like the
culture.
hardest job in the world. It just happens to be flexible.
Yes, I mean, it's true. And she didn't know how to swim, remember? Until
That's
she started
insane.
this. But you know what? I think the thing is, and this is what all the Henyos said repeatedly, older and younger. There's so much comfort and joy for them in being in the water. They feel weightless, they feel free, they feel strong, they feel connected to this planet, they feel connected to nature. The Henyos work in harmony with nature and the marine ecosystem. So I think, as difficult as it is athletically and physically, there's some sort of mental like just pure fulfillment and joy that they all seem to get from being in the water.
Can we talk about your needle drops? Because the music in this documentary is outstanding. Like, I watch a lot of documentaries, and sometimes it feels like they're just not paying attention to the music. And with yours, these moments stood out. And
Hmm.
talk to me about the music selection and what you did with it.
I'm so happy to talk to you about the music. By the way, your observations are so astute. It's great.
Oh,
I love
thank you.
this. I really pay a lot of attention to music, but just in all my films, but just especially with this one. I used to work in the music industry and I have a background in music. So music to me is very important in terms of really filling out a creative vision and making sure a certain emotional tone really comes to the forefront in a certain scene. And with this film, I had a very specific kind of creative brief for the music and for the composer, which was I wanted the music to reflect the Haenyeo culture, which for me is a hybrid of ancient culture and modern times. So I wanted somehow to create a musical landscape that felt both old and ancient and new and modern, because that's the dilemma that we're in with the Haenyeo culture. And so I worked with this incredible composer named Jang Young-gyu. He's kind of like the David Byrne of Korea, where he formed this post-punk,
Cool.
super cool avant-garde band. And their tone, their musical tone is that they take ancient Korean folk instruments that are very specific to Korean history and Korean culture, but they use them in modern compositions. So he already figured out how to have that fusion, because a lot of the instrumentation that you're hearing in the film, it's actually coming from these very ancient Korean traditional folk instruments, but used in a very cool, modern way. So I loved what he did with the music and his team. And then there's two needle drops, or like two licensed tracks.
Right.
One is the very first, what you can tell it's the shaman scene, and it's the first intro
Yes,
scene.
the Goot Festival and the yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's from this incredible group named Akdan Gwangchil, and they're self-described as shamanic K-pop, which means they take a lot
Wow.
of inspiration. I know they're so cool live too. You got to check them out if they ever come tour. They take they take ancient shamanic ritual songs and kind of give them a modern K-pop update, but they keep the very kind of traditional Korean sound in there. So it's this fusion of you don't even know what it is. It's just so cool.
That is wild. And you know what the great thing is? The great thing is I knew none of this about the ancient instrumentation, etc. And yet I could feel it as I
Yeah.
was watching because it was playing on my subconscious in exactly the way you intended it to, I'm assuming.
Okay, good.
Um, tell me this, with the Haenyos at the moment, I'm curious as to how they are perceived in the wider Korean scene because
Mm.
it feels like there's something of a parallel with the pasta nonas, and they
Mm.
suddenly blew up over the
Yeah.
pandemic with TikTok and YouTube and all of that
Yes.
stuff. Is that happening with the Haenyos as well?
Yeah, so I mean, very recently, there's been kind of a lot of media coverage about them. And I'm talking about like in the last year, there was a Vogue photographer that did a pictorial book about them that all the fashion editorial outlets were covering. I feel like I've been hearing about them a lot lately, but generally speaking, and as they themselves talk about in the film, there was a bit of a stigma of the Haenyeo culture for a long time, even though they had been around for centuries and pretty revered on Jeju as matriarchs and breadwinners. There was still a little bit of a stigma that was tied to the physicality of their work. You know, it
Right.
wasn't like a white collar job, obviously. And but then when they were awarded a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage site in 2016, their perception kind of changed within the Korean public, and they felt themselves that they got quite a bit more respect. And I feel like now I've just started to see them as characters in narratives and scripted series, like some K dramas of
Yeah.
note lately have been incorporating them as characters, and people are starting to fall in love with them for the same reasons we do, like the feistiness, the funniness, the humor, the bold confidence. So I can almost see that their public image here seems to really be getting some momentum of like people are finally starting to like really embrace them as heroes, I think. So I'm so thrilled for them, and I'm here for it. I really hope this is just like the start of like a reinvigorated admiration and appreciation for them.
I've got time for one last question, very
Oh yeah.
quickly. The one thing that I couldn't quite ascertain, or rather, I couldn't quite figure out, was whether there was any fear. They feel
Mhm.
fearless and they come off as absolutely fearless. And yet, even when talking about death and talking about the Hanyo's bodies they find and maybe they
Yeah.
struck gold and all of that stuff,
Yeah.
it's said in such a matter-of-fact way that I couldn't figure
Yeah.
out if they feared it themselves. You spent a lot of time with them. Was
Yeah.
there ever moments of fear?
You know, I don't think I sensed any fear from them of their own personal mortality. I do think that they talk about it exactly as you said. It's very matter of fact. every single Haenyeo knew a Haenyeo that had passed away at some point. So I do think, the very unfortunate accidents and deaths that do happen in the Haenyeo culture, they are frequent enough that it's a matter of fact kind of condition of this occupation. I do feel like I felt some fear from them when they were talking about the Fukushima treated radioactive water release.
Right.
I think that,
Because
and
that was an uncertain element. Meanwhile, their
yeah,
diving is something they're so used to.
they know exactly. They know very well how to avoid dying if they're careful about it. They all say the same thing. Don't be too greedy. Don't stay down there too long. You got to come back up. Give yourself enough breath to emerge. The Fukushima water, they didn't know what that was. And really, in all honesty, no one knows what the impact of this water release will be, because it's one of those things that's going to be cumulative over years. And by the time we find out what the impact was, it'll be too late,
Yeah.
unfortunately. I think they know that. And honestly, I think their fear for that was not for themselves, but for how are they going to leave this ocean for their descendants. They kept saying that over and over again. Our children, our descendants, it's our duty to pass on a clean ocean. So I think the fear was they're not going to be able to stop this from happening, and they're not going to be able to pass on this clean legacy. So, that speaks so much to their character. It's like they don't care about themselves. They're just worried about what kind of planet we're giving our children.
Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for this
You
movie.
too.
I enjoyed it. I'm going to tell everyone to watch it.
Thank
And
you.
I asked that question because I have a crippling fear of water. Like, I can't even do swimming pools. So every time
Oh
I
my
see
God.
people do something like this, I'm just like, you guys are amazing. It's magic. But yes,
Yeah.
Sue, thank you so much. And congratulations on the film.
Thank you so much, Emma. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Cheers. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
That was Sue Kim. You can catch her documentary, The Last of the Sea Women, on Apple TV Plus. It is now streaming. Let us know what you think once you've seen it. Sound off in the comments. And thank you so much for watching.